Welcome to the Deep Dive. We pull the threads from your source material and weave them into the essential knowledge you need to be well-informed. Today, we are wrestling with something truly unique, maybe magnificent, maybe frustrating, the Electro Harmonix tube zipper. Yeah, our mission here is really to dissect this high-voltage gamble EHX took. This deep dive is for you if you want the story, like why they tried to jam real tube overdrive together with a pretty radical synth-style filter. We'll get into how that complexity shaped its sound and maybe why it ended up being such a cult classic.
Absolutely. The tube zipper, I mean, it's important because it was genuinely one of Electro Harmonix's wildest tube experiments. Full stop. They weren't just adding, a bit of filtering to a drive pedal. This was blending high voltage actual dual tube distortion with some serious filter craziness. It felt like a very deliberate attempt to bridge their classic tube stuff with their, notorious filter pedals. A real hybrid machine, powerful, yeah, but also temperamental.
Okay, so let's set the scene a bit. When did this beast actually show up, and what was going on at EHX around then?
Right, so we're talking early 2000s, and EHX was having this massive comeback, especially with tube gear. The tube zipper landed alongside some heavy hitters, stuff like the English Muffin, the Black Finger compressor. It was part of that second wave. They were definitely showing they could do more than just, reissue the old 70s classics. They were innovating again.
That context helps, yeah. But the core idea, it was pretty out there, wasn't it? I mean, drive plus filter isn't new, but this sounds like they went way further. What was the actual engineering goal?
The goal seemed to be seamless integration, really deep integration. You had a dual 12AX7 tube stage for distortion.
Real tubes. Real
tubes, yeah. And they paired that with this super responsive, envelope-controlled resonant filter. The whole point was to make them interact dynamically, So the zipper could basically be three things at once. A warm overdrive, a really funky auto-wah, or even like a screaming synth filter, all in one rather large box.
Right, that ambition. That's what pulls in the experimenters, I guess. But that kind of power, it demands certain things physically, doesn't it? Let's talk mechanics. Starting with the drive side, you said real tubes.
Yeah, and that's absolutely crucial. It's the key difference. It wasn't using FETs or op amps trying to sound like tubes. No, the tube zipper had two actual 12AX7s. And importantly, they ran them at proper high voltages.
Oh, okay.
That commitment, that high voltage, that's what gives you the real organic compression, the harmonics, the stuff that makes tube gain feel like tube gain.
Yeah.
Totally different from solid state tube emulation, especially back then.
But proper high voltage usually means big enclosure, special power supply. This thing wasn't exactly compact, was it? Needed that specific 12V AC adapter boosted internally.
Oh, definitely not compact. You can almost see the power just looking at it. Huge steel box, almost like a little desktop unit. And the tubes are right there on top, glowing under the vents.
Right, visible tubes.
Yeah. It took up serious pedal board real estate.
And that power requirement, the special adapter. That was a barrier for some players, for sure. Not just a simple 9-volt pedal. Made it kind of niche from the start.
Okay, so they've got this authentic high-voltage tube gain engine, and they bolted on an equally intense filter section.
Correct. The filter was, it was in the spirit of things like the Q-tron, maybe the old Mu-tron, which EHX knows inside and out, obviously. Yeah. But the zipper's filter, it felt like it was built for a really extreme range. More resonance, more sweep. The kind you need for proper synth tones, not just a bit of quack.
So you've built this fire-breathing hybrid. How did they actually let you control it? Let's walk through the main knobs, like a RAID map for someone trying to tame this thing.
Yeah, the controls are pretty logical, split between gain and filter.
Yeah.
On the tube side, you've got your drive knob, standard stuff, sets the amount of tube gain, and then volume, obviously, for the overall output level. The other three knobs, all filter. You've got Q, which is the resonance, the sharpness of that filter peak.
Right, the scream control. Exactly. Crank that Q and things get wild. It can self-oscillate.
T for those synth sounds, I bet.
Totally. Then there's sensitivity. That decides how much the filter reacts to how hard you play, your picking dynamics. And finally, frequency. This sets the filter's center point. But it's also really important because it acts like a manual filter control if you switch off the envelope following.
The switches.
Yeah.
Right. It wasn't just the knobs. There were a couple of crucial switches that changed everything, yeah.
Yeah, they basically define how you use the pedal. First switch was filter direction. Up sweep, like your classic wah sound. Or down sweep, which, bass players often like, or for darker, moodier filter sounds. And the second switch was the envelope bypass. Flick that, and the filter stops following your playing. It just stays put. Then you use that frequency knob to manually park the filter wherever you want, like a fixed, super resonant tone. Think cocteau sounds, but you can make them really vowel-like and intense.
And then hit that with the tube drive.
Exactly. Drive that fixed resonant sound, creates these amazing sustained vocal textures.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting, the sound. You said the individual parts were good quality. Tell us about just the tube overdrive on its own.
The gain is great, really responsive. It's warm, fat, very organic crunch. You can dial it back for just a little bit of touch-sensitive breakup, nice for bluesy stuff. Or you can crank it for really thick, pretty aggressive saturation. That high voltage really lets the tubes breathe and work properly.
And the filter by itself.
Yeah.
Without the drive.
Classic EHX filter sound, really. Funky, quacky, dynamic, you get those vowel sounds. But like we said, because of that extreme range, it could do much wilder sweeps than, say, a standard wah pedal. Definitely had that synth filter quality.
But the real magic, the aha moment, was putting them together. Running that high voltage tube grid into that crazy resonant filter, what actually happens. And I mean, combining that much saturation with an extreme range filter, doesn't that just make it impossible to control for most people?
Well, that's kind of the whole story of the tube zipper, isn't it? That tension. Yeah, it was hard to tame, high Q, high drive. Things could get chaotic fast, ripping lead tones, yeah, but also unpredictable feedback, weird oscillations.
Sounds risky.
It was, but for the player who was willing to really sit down and tweak it, the reward was this sound, this interaction that you just couldn't get by sticking a separate drive and filter pedal together. There's a unique synergy there.
So sounds that could almost define a genre, or maybe invent one.
Yeah, pretty much. The combination could give you these huge, fat, synth-based growls. Bassists loved it for that.
I've heard that.
And for guitar, these searing leads that just didn't sound like a guitar anymore. Super harmonically rich, really synthesized sounding. The way the tube clipping interacts with that resonant filter sweep, it creates these weird, unique harmonic peaks. It's a total texture machine.
And that naturally drew in the more experimental types, right? Bassists for the synth lows, guitarists for synth leads. What about noise artists?
Oh, they were probably its biggest fans, honestly. Noise and experimental folks, they really leaned into the chaos. Using those aggressive, almost self-oscillating sweeps combined with the distortion, they could build entire soundscapes with it. Not just playing notes, but generating textures. It became this really powerful tool for making sounds that were super abrasive, super unique, but also undeniably analog and complex.
Okay, let's pull back to the big picture. It sounds technically amazing, sonically groundbreaking, yet it got discontinued. Where does this pedal actually fit in the grand EHX history?
It really sits as a statement of their philosophy at the time. EHX was willing to take some pretty big risks. This was a true hybrid, not just, tweaking an old circuit. It showed the revived EHX under Mike Matthews was ready to invest heavily in analog tube tech and merge it with their craziest filter ideas. It actively bridged those two big parts of their identity, the tube line and the filter envelope line.
Expensive to build, needed that special power brick. Physically huge. Sounds like a tough sell for the average guitar player just wanting some overdrive.
And that's exactly why it didn't last in the main lineup. The experimental crowd, they loved it, adored it even. But the size, the power needs, the sheer unpredictability sometimes, it was just too much, too quirky for mainstream players who maybe wanted something simpler, more reliable, set and forget.
Right.
So as EHX started pushing towards smaller pedals later on the Nano series, the EXO enclosures, this big, complex, high-voltage beast, just didn't fit that new direction. It got dropped.
But it definitely has that cult status now. And unlike almost every other EHX icon, big muffs, small stones, Qtrons, they've never reissued the tube zipper in a smaller form factor.
Exactly. And that right there, that confirms how unique its design probably was, how tied it was to that specific high voltage setup. Originals are really sought after now because that specific sound, that high voltage tube gain slamming into that extreme analog filter, EHX themselves haven't managed or maybe haven't wanted to replicate it or shrink it down. If you want that sound, you got to find the original big metal box.
Okay, so let's try and synthesize this. What are the, say, 4 key points that really define the historical importance of this magnificent, chaotic box?
Okay, 4 things. First, it was definitely one of EHX's most ambitious tube experiments, period. Really maximizing what tubes could do outside of just being in an amp. Second, it successfully merged 2 really different product lines, tube drive and advanced filters, showing they could interact in cool, dynamic ways.
Right.
Third, It proved the modern EHX wasn't just about nostalgia. They were still an engine for real technical innovation, willing to take chances. And finally, fourth, even though it was complex, its core idea kind of paved the way for later hybrid pedals, maybe simpler ones, that tried to capture some of that tube meets filter magic, even if none quite got the full voltage and craziness of the original zipper.
It really was a beautiful experiment, wasn't it? Maximum voltage, maximum filter sweep, proving that sometimes the trickiest circuits give you the most unique, maybe the most rewarding sounds. So wrapping up this deep dive, the Electro Harmonix tube zipper. It blended real high-voltage tube warmth with some seriously wild resonant filter chaos. Maybe too big, too complex for the mainstream market, which led to it being discontinued. But for players chasing aggressive, experimental, truly synthesized sounds, it was, and still is, a huge success.
Yeah, the tube zipper is just such a great example of that tension, between pushing the technology and what the market actually wants or can handle. EHX built this technically demanding thing, knowing those high-voltage tubes were key to its sound, but also knowing that complexity would limit who'd buy it.
Which leaves us with a final thought for you, the listener. Think about how often EHX does reissue classic pedals, sometimes even using digital tech to mimic the old analog circuits. What does it really say about the tube zipper's unique analog guts, its inherent complexity, that even today this chaos machine hasn't been replicated? Is it just too hard to shrink down that high-voltage tube circuitry faithfully? Or maybe it's a deliberate choice, leaving this niche legend as a kind of trophy only for those dedicated enough to hunt down the original beast, something to chew on next time you hear a guitar tone so wild, so ripping, you swear it must be a synth. But maybe, just maybe, it's one of these.